Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It is World Cup T20 time. Our early impressions of the tournament. Is it a great idea to be playing a World T20 in the hurricane season? We've got the best performances so far in the 6 or so games that we've got. We've got some hot takes, including talking about the Super 8 seeding, which we found out might be ridiculous. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, we are a week or so into World Cup in the United States and the Caribbean. Fair to say, certainly a bit of interest in the tournament so far. It looks as if it's kicked off reasonably well, and I'm sure we'll all have our own views on that. But we're going to cover, not a detailed game by any stretch of the imagination. We're, not quite into the realms of every team having played once. That kind of happens, I think, over the weekend here in New Zealand. So Sunday night, I think New Zealand is when everyone will have played at least one game, if my maths and time zones are correct. But we've got an expert on the space-time continuum right here as well. But we do want to cover off, I think, some of our early impressions of the tournament. And Stu, it's not in the order that's on the run sheet, but we got a question, I think, in comments on the podcast that came out last week, our preview, because we'd given our views of who would make it through to the semi-finals by way of the Super 8s. And quite rightly got told that couldn't possibly happen due to the pre-tournament seedings. We've done a bit of a delve, and when I say we're you,
it's not any of the rest of us.
I've done a little bit of a delve on these seedings, but should we cover that off first? Because me and Bordy have just had some, I guess, hearty debates whilst we're off air, which we should have put on.
Disagreement.
We should have put on air, to be fair, but
give us the facts and we'll give you the rubbish.
Yeah, you asked me for a hot take, and I guess this isn't hot take because, as you've mentioned, one of our alert listeners already figured it out and talked to us about it in the YouTube comments. Lots of people I've seen online have been talking about it. Wisden had a big thing, and I'll quote you sort of their explanation for this. But the my basic understanding of it is that the Super 8 seeding, at least, because what happens is teams go into the Super 8 phase, top 2 from each group at the moment goes into the Super 8, and those Super 8 teams are split into 2 groups of 4, which will then be the top 2, and those go through to the semi-finals. So if you can kind of wrap your head around all of the, 5 to 2 to 8 to 4 to all of those kind of numbers, then we actually get to the fact that those groups of 4 are already somewhat predetermined. That, that has to assume that the teams that are the top 8 ranked teams in T20 cricket actually make it through because, that's how the seeding is done. But maybe I should just read from Wisden because it's probably a better explanation than I can. But it just seemed like an absolutely ridiculous thing to me. And, apart from everything that's going on in terms of the tournament, it seems like what are we actually playing some of these pool games for?
And so if my understanding is correct, even if England, for example, finish second in their group with Australia as the team that finishes first, England would go into the A1 or B1 banana one position in that.
Hold on. Let's talk about something that actually might happen. So say Scotland and Australia make it through. So if Australia finishes top, they're still not going through in that number.
So let me read this because it actually uses England as the example. So, it says here, word for word from Wisden. So, credit to them for actually doing the background on this.
I use the word forthwith at least once, and if it's Wisden.
I don't think so, no. So they say it's worth mentioning that Super 8 groups are not dependent on where the teams will finish during the group stage, as they will retain their first round seeding, which makes it an already predictable route. For example, if England finish second in Group B and Australia finish first, England will still retain the A1 slot for the Super 8 stage. In the case one of the top 2 seeded teams doesn't qualify, the team replacing them will be allotted the slot of the seeded team was supposed to be in. So, for instance, if Scotland qualify instead of England,
B1.
They would assume the schedule of A1, which is England in the second round. So according to the seeding, those top 4 groups, if these teams all qualify, will be India, Australia, New Zealand and Sri Lanka in one pool, Pakistan, England, West Indies and South Africa in the others. And
where's Rafa Nadal seeded?
Well, and is Bernard Tomic got a wild card for the event?
The only rationale I can see for this is that it's to do with, figuring out, one, it seems like India already knows where they're playing their semi-final, assuming again that they make it through to that point. I suppose maybe it helps fans to figure out, this is a tournament that's being played over lots of different places. Maybe it's helpful for fans to go, okay, well, my team, if we make it through, are going to be in this pool, so I know I can play, they're going to be in the A1 slot or whatever, so now I can go and do all of that. But it just feels like absolute nonsense to me. What it takes away a lot of the jeopardy, I think, from the pool part of this group stage.
I mean, the only rationale I can think of is this, it's to do with time slots, but you're telling me it's not to do with that at all.
Well, it probably is as well. It's probably a range of all of those things. And I mean, look, it's probably to do with the BCCI saying we'd like to be in this slot.
Do you reckon India have booked the hotels and the flights already then?
Well, they've booked their semi-final venue. If they make it to the semi-final, they know which one they're going to play at.
Yeah, so maybe maybe this is fantastic for the logistics of, the player experience.
Was that a pun? It was fantastic.
Oh, well, I don't think it. Well, maybe it's good for the fans actually traveling to the games, but I think for us watching at home, I don't know. It feels like it takes something away from it for me.
It's just as easy to say if India make the semi-finals, they will play in venue X.
Yeah, totally. You could do that without doing what they're doing here, because this is a manipulation of that next stage.
Yeah,
right. Like. If all of these teams make it through, this is saying, okay, well, New Zealand, you have to play against India, Australia, and Sri Lanka, assuming they will. I mean, somebody's hot take might be that they're already done.
They're already done. It is rumoured that a Dutch bargee can swear without repetition or pause for 2.5 minutes. I think if we turned the family filter off, each one of us could break that record, because that is the most bleeping ridiculous piece of scheduling I have ever heard of at major tournaments, and that includes all permutations of World Cups in any sport. That sucks.
I mean, you're 100% right.
I'm not sure you're right on any sport, by the way. I'm pretty sure in FIFA tournaments, they do tell you where the semis are going to be, or where your team will be if they qualify for quarters and semis.
No, but it's A1, B2 or whatever, and you still have to be it's ranked in those pools.
Well,
which I thought that's what this was, and I guess that's So look, we're winding back. There's a fact that we didn't do enough research last week to actually know this. That's how this came about.
I have a vague recollection that Adam's right in that co-hosted tournaments, if the team makes the semi-finals, that they would play in that.
They know the venue, but it's still the
that's just one thing. They've completely manipulated who is playing in the Super 8's fixtures. If they get through.
Look, we're assuming that for this to all come true, those teams actually need to make it out of their groups first. So, there are some teams in that group that, or those are they 8 that we just named, that will feel there is some jeopardy and still we're going to have to perform well. Yeah. But I think, let's say, look, Scotland, very unlucky today, I think, rained out of a chance to beat England. But,
or very lucky that they didn't lose. But yeah,
one of those two things. But, look,
essentially we can't have an India-New Zealand semi-final.
No, I don't think so.
No, and we can't have a... Yeah.
Most importantly, particularly given my IPL predictions, does this mean there can't be that West Indies Australia final with West Indies?
I think the finals can be any of them.
It can. Okay. So my
finals can be any of them, because obviously, two teams from one group of 4 could still both win their semi-finals.
Who do the West Indies have to beat to get? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they've manipulated that road in the Super 8s.
I still want a mulligan on my predictions for a start. Because it's all bet, as they say in that great Guy Ritchie film, all bets are off.
Overruled.
Let's move on to the actual cricket though, because we could debate this, but
so we don't like it. Is the
I think it's
As
nonsense.
dumb as a
I'd love for someone in the comments, if they want to actually argue the positives, because I just don't see them. I don't. It makes no sense to me why you would want the tournament to be manipulated in this way. It should really, in my opinion, all just come down to how well you play.
Yeah.
Like, let's say, Scotland plays brilliant. They qualify first in that pool, and they knock out Australia. England would still go through as one, and Scotland has to go in as two. And I just think you should get to go in where you deserve to
pop
go.
it in the comments below, or mention us at the Top Order Pod on our social channels, or give us an email at toporderpodcast@gmail.com if you want to abuse us via email.
Long-winded explanations are probably better either in email or post.
Yes, absolutely. Send us a letter. P.O. Box
1234 in your capital city.
Yeah. Should we talk about the cricket?
Sure.
So I suppose we don't want to go into the game by game, but I think obviously there's been a lot made from a tournament perspective that this is a really, really big shop window for USA cricket. Clearly, as hosts, they get the opportunity to play the first game. What I guess are our impressions just before we do go into some individual performances of the way this tournament has kicked off? The crowds haven't been stellar yet. I was surprised, for example, that first West Indies game wasn't the home support I would have expected. But yeah, on the whole, what do we think to the start of the tournament, and maybe particularly that USA-Canada game? I thought it was a good start to the tournament.
Have we breath tested Bordy for this pod?
I've got very limited energy, and I'm going to use it in the next 25 minutes before I fall in a heat. The problem with the West Indies game was that the ticket prices for all of those stands that we saw behind us, the green seats that were empty, was $75 each.
Oof.
That's a lot of money to go and see. Who'd they play?
Papua New Guinea.
Yeah. It's a lot of money to go and see PNG, and I know there are many PNG fans in the West Indies going to games, but I don't even think that they, having paid £1 million each to fly to Australia and then to Miami and then to Havana and then across to the West Indies, would have enough money to then be left over for seats, because that's a lot of flying on a lot of different airlines.
A lot of money to take your family as well.
Exactly.
But the one exception to the crowds was the Nepal game. Did you see
good.
Did anyone see the Nepal game? How good I was almost wanting one of those, Nepal's my second team shirts that everyone was wearing in the crowd. It was an incredible atmosphere in that game.
Oh yeah, no, that was very cool, and I've seen in a few other lead up games, Nepal's support has been fantastic. So yeah, huge credit to them for getting out. But yeah, I didn't realise it's $75. I remember when the games were here for the 2015 ODI World Cup, and thinking how awesome it was that the tickets were super cheap. So like I remember getting tickets, I think for $20 or something to games that weren't New Zealand games, because it was like, oh, this is awesome. I can just go to every single game that I can. So yeah, that does seem bizarre.
To be fair, the hill seats that were much better attended were a lot cheaper, but if you wanted to sit in that stand in the lime green seats, lots of money. Yeah. That's the only fact you'll get from me tonight, boys, other than that.
USA Canada as the showpiece. What did we think of? I guess Dallas looks like it's a nice little cricket ground, doesn't it?
It does. Why don't you go on US? Because I remember, like on the first day you were messaging us, it seemed like you were quite into that game. I know we were going to talk about performances. You were pretty keen on what Aaron Jones did in that game.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think, as I said, I think last week, oldest cricket fixture in the world. They
may have mentioned that 500 or 300 times on the commentary.
Yeah, good. But yeah, look, I thought the batting performance was pretty stellar. And I think one of the things you've seen throughout the course of the tournament is we have seen plenty of variability in terms of the wickets and the weather. This was a pretty good deck, high scoring game. We've seen some low scoring games. Now you're going to, when you have the associate nations up against, Anrich Nortje, for example, they used the dimensions of that ground brilliantly, I thought, and there was obviously a little bit in that wicket. But look, I thought
calling Sri Lanka an associate nation. We had a few Sri Lankan comments on the pod last week that weren't that
I've had several
friendly.
Sri Lankan people reach out to me this week over the course of the last week and tell me how wrong we were, that Sri Lanka were. I can't remember if we referred to them directly as a shambles, but I think
you guys. I actually still think Sri Lanka have got some.
I'm not calling them an associate nation, but it's a bit of a Freudian slip that might actually come true based on the ineptitude of that batting performance. But I certainly think from a US perspective, a Dallas perspective, I thought it was a really decent start to the tournament. I thought that the game was of a decent quality. Again, I'm sure there's some World Cup speed guns that, they probably have a similar algorithm to Australia, just turn it up for the home side. But the bowling speeds were pretty good in that game. And then some of the batting, particularly from, from Dallowell for Canada, and then Jones.
Nicholas Curtin, I enjoyed. He was
good as well.
He looked really good. Someone I didn't know much about.
So I think the quality of that, I was pleasantly surprised. I think that looked like a game where if you're in that group, you're kind of thinking, well, actually, there isn't. And again, we'll talk about the England-Scotland game. I don't think there's too many upsets, if you can call them upsets. You're going to see, I think, some of these nations turn over the so-called bigger boys, and it won't be an upset, and they won't think it's an upset when they win those games.
It's like the Netherlands was saying that in the 50 over World Cup, weren't they? They were like, look, we expect to compete in this tournament, and we think we can make it through.
Oman have come out this week and said exactly the same thing in the lead up to playing Australia.
It's all got the same sports psychologists.
Facilities-wise, I think we'll get onto that a bit later, but that particular ground, it wasn't massive, it wasn't small, it was about 70 metres boundaries sort of all the way around. The outfield was lightning quick, but that pitch was very hard and fast. I feel like when they start playing some of the nations with bowlers over 140 Ks, that sort of changes the dynamic a little bit. With the 120, 130 K bowlers, it was coming off nicely off the bat, and I think that's why those scores were put on. Incredible innings by Aaron Jones as well. It sounded really good.
Oh, well, didn't it sound good off his bat?
Yeah.
He must have an awesome bat.
Well, he's got the turquoise cap spoiler for the first week of the
there you go. Heard it here first.
2020 World Cup.
Great metrics for the casual American fan, though, in that game. The Americans in baseball love home runs. They love things going out of the park, and they love people who can throw 100 mile an hour. And so if you've got bowlers that are the speed guns turned up, then that's all to the good for the casual American cricket fan.
I do think an ex-baseball ground, that stadium in Dallas. There you go.
I do think that innings from Aaron Jones was quite important in that for halfway through that game. Look, I have to say I was tuning into that game hoping that Corey Anderson might do something cool. That was my big reason for tuning into that game. But he ended up. We saw a few of his slow balls, which was cool, but he ended up being quite a minor player in that. At the halfway stage, Canada, I was thinking Canada's got enough here. Yeah. They're home. They're looking really good. Obviously, a wicket and Stephen Taylor out early, 40 odd for 2 after the power play. And you're thinking, okay, this is big problems. This might not derail the tournament, but a bit of a dampener on the US, actually getting excited about this and the fans coming out. But that innings from Aaron Jones and Hussey, it was a brilliant partnership, but Jones certainly stole the show. And it sounds like you didn't like the celebrations after every boundary.
Well, I think it was actually the one where he's nicked it there between first and second, or first and keeper, and he's fist pumped as it's gone through. I was like, that's a bit much. But I'm not taking anything away from him. That last 6 he hit to win the game was massive. Turquoise cap all the way. But it's very important, I think, that game in the whole, if we're talking about this as the first week, in the grand scheme of it, that is a very important game because it puts a lot more shine on the tournament. Had that have been 110 plays 115, that sort of changes our impression of the first week.
We come on to the other host nation, so I think again bit of a bum squeaker for West Indies, and could have been a very different start to the tournament if PNG had got up on them. And at one stage it looked like they might do. Yeah,
I think what they need, I've written down, West Indies were 5 down with 37 to get off 19 balls. It was like they actually had to step up there. I think Andre Russell hit a big 6 after that. Yeah. Roston Chase hit a boundary, and suddenly they were kind of, that's how quickly it can kind of change it when you're chasing in a T20 game. But yeah, they equipped themselves really, really well. Yeah, Sese Bauer, that innings, that 50 that he scored, really very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
That probably segues a little bit to like one of my early impressions, which was that I think that every single team in this tournament is going to need a very good plan against spin. And actually, I think that's what Sese Bauer did really, really well in his innings. And then actually, to be fair, Roston Chase did quite well. And, a number, as we'll sort of talk about some of the other games, I think particularly Gurbaz the night before was I think the best plan against spin that I've seen so far. Used the crease really well, came down the wicket to meet the ball as much as possible on the half volley and stuff, and took toll of the spinners. But we've seen, you guys were talking about pitches. Every single team is lining up with 2, maybe 3 spin options. And if you don't have a plan against spin, not necessarily that you're not going to be able to hit boundaries, because I think all teams are able to hit boundaries. I think you've got to have a plan to rotate the strike against spin, and that's proving quite difficult on some of these wickets.
Well, for me, again, it comes back to we don't know what a good score is, right? Like West Indies were chasing 136 here against PNG. I think they felt they were going to chase that down very easily.
Yeah.
When they lost Shafane Rutherford, I think it was at 97 for 5. All of a sudden, there's a bit of panic going through. I called Amy over. Amy, come over here and watch this. This could be a one for the record books. But they managed to get it. But we've seen that a lot with the first week. The team that's chasing has been quite circumspect and sort of building into it. And if things go wrong when they're doing that, it might be a bit of a problem. Munsey was also very good for Scotland against spin with the sweeping as well.
I think the other thing I've kind of picked up on is it's not necessarily just to think about your plan against spin or your plan against pace. We're seeing a mixture of day games and day-night games. Mm-hmm. We're seeing very different surfaces, even between two matches. If we kind of look at that Oman Namibia game, relatively low scoring game in Bridgetown in Barbados, and then this morning we've seen England play on the same ground, and it looks a completely different wicket 2 days. 2 days later. Yeah. So I think, we've got weather, we've got dew, we've got day games, we've got night games. We've got, that really big ground, which is in New York, isn't it? Massive square. So that's where your seamers potentially and your spinners to an extent are going to, make sure they're bowling to the long side, and you're going to see lots of caught deep square or whatever. So I think it's the teams that are able to, switch between venues and switch between potentially those day-night games and deal with a hot day or a dewy day or today a rainy day for Scotland and England.
How panicked do you think the ICC are after that game in New York, the Sri Lanka South Africa game? They've got the Pakistan India game slated to be played there. The pitch was a bit variable, to put it lightly. The outfield was very sandy and not quick. Do you think that they're panicking about this? Because, what was it, 77 plays 80.
It took South Africa a while to get there.
16 overs in the 17th over to win it. It's not the greatest spectacle for the game.
I wonder if ICC need to just borrow a phrase from this podcast and just control the controllables, because now there's not much they can really do about the condition of that outfield or the condition of the wicket. They probably can't drop in another pitch. They can't replace that wicket. There's probably not a lot they can do now. It's kind of, they've cast the dice and they're going to have to live with it. So, not a lot that the ICC should be losing sleep over, other than the fact that, you're going to have a big marquee game, and it could be 120 plays 125 between two great powerhouse nations.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but what I would say, I think, is, again, and this is some knowledge and some opinion and conjecture, which is pretty much the hallmark of any comment I make on the podcast. I think you can actually adapt those drop-in pitches and kind of go, we've got this a little bit wrong in terms of the moisture or the rolling or whatever, and go and correct it and actually turn it into something that might be flat and slow, but at least it's flat. Mm-hmm. Outfield, I agree. There's not a great deal they can do about that. And I think, when we actually look at the scheduling in the tournament, we very quickly move away from the US for the second half. There's nothing that's played
as soon as we go to the Super 8.
Super 8. But again, I think we're going to see that variability because of the weather, because of the fact it is a storm season. So we're going to see some rain and see some jeopardy from that perspective.
The three best performances this week, other than Jones's 94, in my mind, have all been bowlers.
Yeah, which is a refreshing change after the IPL.
Exactly, it's night and day different from the IPL. Whereas if you took 4 wickets in the IPL, you'd probably played 7 or 8 games,
wouldn't it? And is that a problem? Like, we're just talking about these low scores and all the spectacle. I've seen some people say I'd much rather watch this than the IPL, where they're hitting sixes every second ball. And where do we stand on that kind of debate?
I'll just say really, really quickly, I'm rereading a book that I've read before, which is hence the reread comment. Ed Smith, who was an England selector and did play a couple of test matches for England, he really got into baseball in a an off season. He broke his hand and went over to the US and really got into the New York Mets. I mean, he wrote a book about the comparisons between baseball and cricket. And I think, one of the things we talked about is this home run piece. There's only one in every single baseball game.
Yeah.
And the pitcher is the one that's expected to win when you're playing a baseball game. So I think there's some nice parallels you can draw in terms of seeing the bowlers with the expectation, particularly of exploiting those conditions. And I've got to agree. I would rather see a World Cup where you have the occasional, run fest, but that you actually see some games where the ball is on top, because I think that really then tests your depth. It tests the way that you've put your side together. It tests the balance of your all rounders and your spinners better than stacking your side with 8 batters and playing on roads. But that's my view of what entertains me. I think it'll be different for different fans.
I think there's a real sweet spot in terms of runs scored, and I've got it down here as probably between 145 to 180 in terms of balance between bat and ball. I feel like any more than that, you've had these teams in the IPL scoring 270 runs in 20 overs. Contrast that with watching two teams, only put up 100 runs. It's actually quite hard to watch some of these low-scoring games from a 2020 perspective, especially because that product is sold as a, high-octane, fast-paced game. When you've got sort of 4 singles and 2 dot balls and an over, it kind of does take away from it a little bit, and it becomes hard to watch when it is hard to bat. I think there is a balance there. Obviously, you don't want the bowlers getting carted everywhere, but there is a balance.
Is that your prediction of what the run ranges will be, or what you want to see?
That's what I think. There's a sweet spot in there where it's a good balance between bat and ball.
Yeah, I'm probably the same. I did come to enjoy some of the aspects of the IPL in terms of being, seeing boundaries, and I guess seeing the way that batters are able to get creative and actually figure out, okay, I can hit a boundary every single ball if I use my skills and all of that kind of stuff. But it does become a different kind of skill. And I think that, going back to my spin point, I think that I hope that we're going to see the best batters shine, I suppose, in this tournament. And that's where having a bit of challenge for the batters will actually make that happen, what I hope. And I mean, certainly hope that from a New Zealand point of view, when you think about someone like Kane Williamson, who we talked about, didn't really get a run in the IPL. When we looked back at the IPL, it was guys like Smith and Root and Williamson, these guys that we've thought for years are the pinnacle of batting and how you're supposed to go about batting and being able to figure out, okay, this is the score I need to get. Those players just didn't really have a role in T20 cricket, but they might have a significant role at this kind of a World Cup if this is what's going to continue.
If you watched that game, the Nepal-Netherlands game, that pitch was actually a pitch that was from the early 2000s or late 90s, where Van Beek and New Zealand Baz Dalidi were getting the ball to talk off the deck. Yeah. They would have, rolled through a lot of the top teams in that bowling innings where they played. So I like that balance there. They don't just have to play it on length and line. You've got to wait and see what the ball's going to do, or play a shot that's going to allow you to bail out.
Well, that's what those South Africans did. If Baldy wants to segue back to Anrich Nortje here, because that was, I mean,
before we do, can I just ask you a question? Because I can see you grinning, and I reckon I know why. New Zealand haven't played yet, obviously, in the tournament, but a good day for the New Zealand connections today before we move on.
Yeah, very nice. Game. Yeah, Max, good for you boys at Hibiscus. Yeah, at Hibiscus Coast, a bit of representation there.
But Pringle and Van Beek as well.
Tim Pringle and Logan Van Beek. So yes, very good day out for the New Zealanders, for the Netherlands. The Netherlands, let's see what happens to them in this group. That's I think, quite an evenly matched group. We talked about that last week, that there are a lot of sides that might fancy themselves getting out of that pool. The Netherlands have shown for quite a few tournaments now that they don't fear anyone, and they're going to go into every single game thinking we can win. They've obviously beaten South Africa recently. They're going to have to play them in this group. They're going to look at what happened to Sri Lanka in this opening game and think, we can have a crack at them. And they've got a core of experienced players now for the Netherlands, and they remind me a little bit of what Ireland were, back when they were upsetting sides more regularly. They had a core group of players that played in all of these tournaments, and they got to the point where they were very, very experienced, and they had the O'Briens and they had the Moonies and they had all these, Trent Johnson, that kind of core guys that would, be able to play many, many games against the same opposition and start to know their weaknesses and be able to have no fear. And I think the Netherlands are at that point. And I would not be surprised if they put a scare up every single, they're going to make themselves a tough out against every team. And I think that was probably the point you were making earlier about even teams like the USA and Canada.
And Tim Pringle, you're happy he's completed his Daniel Vettori cosplay? He's actually a doppelganger for Daniel Vettori at the moment, even wearing number 11.
Oh, yeah. Look, I mean, isn't that what you're supposed to do as a left arm spinner here in New Zealand? I mean, people, Santner had the glasses. People kind of thought that was a Vettori thing.
That might be due to a sight issue.
Well, yes, obviously that has some significance, but I think, anything that you can do to make yourself more aligned with Daniel Vettori, it seems moving to Northern Districts or, growing up in Northern Districts certainly helps. Yeah.
Having poor eyesight also helps.
Right, let's move on from, you talk about cosplay. You really do team up with this spin stuff too often.
Well, for the Sri Lanka, because you're obviously got to be in your bonnet.
Well, first game.
Okay, but can we give some credit to South Africa? Because I actually thought that, I mean, maybe it's some credit goes to the pitch in terms of how that all played. But, I mean, Otniel Bartman, that spell from him was fantastic. Ball was jagging all over the place. I think, you'll give a little bit of credit to Nortje, and I think what he did...
4 for 7, I'll give him a little bit more than a little credit.
Well, it almost... I wrote down on my sheet that all of those 4 wickets were caught on the boundary, which I think actually does him a little bit of a disservice, because what he did so well is that he bowled enough dots, and when they actually had to take a risk, they were having to take a risk, and he was able to extract that pace and bounce that meant that they didn't quite get it right. But you obviously think that this is just a poor performance from Sri Lanka rather than...
Look, I just like being right. And I also like it when other people are wrong. So you said that Anrich Nortje couldn't hit the...
Well, he couldn't hit the IPL.
He couldn't.
And you were right. But now you're wrong. And also...
I like this ball, dude.
Also, I was right in that Sri Lanka couldn't score a run, and I think that was your point, Raj, so I'll give you credit for that. Just having copped a barrage of criticism, both online and in person over the last week, about Sri Lanka are a much better side and they've got lots of run scorers. True. All true. They have a good bowling attack. All true. But again, it's very hard to defend 75.
And we actually picked it. They scored 77, and it was hard to defend it.
Yeah.
It's always going to be hard to defend that in any cricket game.
But
their bowling attack is very good.
Yeah, 100%. So they need to score 150 to give themselves any chance of winning games. And if they can beat sides. But
Hasaranga batting at 4 was a surprise to me. I don't know if anyone else thought that was going to happen. And I also think it was the worst dismissal probably that's going to be there for the rest of the tournament. At that situation, I think they were 2 for 20 odd. Yeah. He came down the wicket on his second ball and just missed it.
Look, there were trumpets in his own head. He was on the charge. There were bugles playing, all chariots of fire, everything. He was on the run.
Well, I think that again goes back to the point that you're making before around people are going to have to learn pretty quick what is a good score. And I think that's where having
77 isn't.
Well, yeah, but maybe 110 in that game was.
No, absolutely.
And actually if they'd have gone out in that game and thought they'd have got to 20 for 2 and gone, let's try and get 130 here rather than getting to 20 for 2 and Hasaranga probably thinking, oh geez, like with no chance unless we get over 150. And then then you're changing what you're doing. And I think having that ability at the top of your order, which has not been how top orders have been built necessarily in T20 cricket at the moment. And so I think, it's going to be, I think that's going to be really crucial to figuring out how your team is able to work in this tournament.
It's a bit of a problem for Australia because their top order is not built like that. We left Steve Smith at home. We left Marnus Labuschagne at home. We left at home guys who can play the Williamson type of role, and we picked guys that were either in form or not in form, or can smash 100 off 6 overs. But I don't see many people in that Australian team crafting their way to 155 for 6. But what I think what teams are going to need to learn pretty quickly is wickets in hand are now the key, because you can score 37 off 19 balls if you've got 5 in the shed, but you can't if you've only got 1 or 2 going into the 16th or 17th over. So a bit of a mindset change, I think, from the IPL for some of these top sixes.
And unfortunately, Steve Smith isn't at home. He's on comms, but that's another story.
That hasn't been great so far.
Can we talk? We don't want to go game by game, as we said, but we've talked about a lot of the I guess the associate and the challenger nation, shall we say? Afghanistan looked really good, I thought.
And you all laughed at me last week, didn't you? You all laughed at me when I said that they're going to be hard. They're going to be a really challenging
them against Uganda.
No, I agree, but look, the way that they're set up, I think that they're going to be a challenging side. And you know, you looked at that West Indies Papua New Guinea game. That's where New Zealand, and I think that the same place that Afghanistan played Uganda, that is where New Zealand's going to be playing Afghanistan on the weekend. It sounds like they'll be playing at night. Dew is going to be a factor in that Afghanistan game. I think they all had towels out. Potentially that impacts how your spinners bowl and all that kind of stuff. I agree. They looked very, very impressive. Like I said,
and ball.
Good, yeah. Gurbaz was the best. Had the best plan out of all the different people that I've seen bat so far in this tournament.
Played really well.
Faruqi got a 5 for opening the bowling as well. So
look, had trick twice, I think, wasn't he?
Lots of things going right for Afghanistan. They are dangerous, but as we said earlier in the preview, if New Zealand and other teams in that group are going to have aspirations of getting to the semi-finals and winning the tournament, they're going to have to beat sides like that. You can't afford to slip up against Afghanistan in this tournament.
And just going to the Scotland-England game from this morning, what complications does that add to the tournament with the no result so early in the tournament for England against Scotland? It kind of means now that they have to beat Australia to have their destiny in their own hands. Otherwise, it could come down to run rate because them and Scotland are sharing the points in this abandoned or no result game.
Yeah, I'll let the listeners sort of tell us what the rules are because that seems.
I think you're right. Yeah. If we're expecting Scotland to be the third side in that group, then yes, I think you're spot on. That
it helps Australia.
Yeah,
if they manage to get on the park for all their games.
If Scotland and Australia is rained out, and Australia beat England, England's in a world of trouble.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think you're right. You've been saying it before about the weather. It seems like so far, at least, the weather is going to be a factor in this tournament. I think even we look back at that opening game, we're pretty lucky, I think, to get that game started 6 hours earlier. I think it was pouring with rain. So,
which makes it even more bizarre that the second semi-final doesn't have a rain day.
Well,
and the first one does.
Yep.
There's a whole
There's some conspiracy theories.
There's some very weird things going on.
I'll make sure that this podcast has some tinfoil hats ready for episodes more towards the knockout pointy end of the tournament.
We haven't talked much about that Super Over game, Namibia Oman. I know you enjoyed that. That Trump. You're talking about Faruqi being on a hat trick. Trumpelman to start that tournament. How good was? The first one was pretty good. The second one is like the perfect toe crusher that you could ever hope to bowl, isn't it? He's pitched out, starts outside off, swings back, hits him dead on the toe in front of middle stump.
I had absolute flashbacks of Nathan Astle just getting pole LBW first or second over of a one-day international with that exact ball. Play around your pads.
That feels a bit harsh on Nathan. One of our best.
Hey, I wanted him on our Mount Rushmore, so go back and listen to that episode. Ruben Trumpelman, he's actually the performance that I've highlighted along with David Rees, so you can talk about him a little later on. That 4 for 21, that first ball, as you mentioned, I think it was Matthew Hayden in commentary. He got a little bit excited talking about it doing all kinds of things in the air, but it was a great first ball. It's going to be always hard to hit that as a batsman, facing it first up, and then the second one just bananaed in.
That was so good, that second one.
Wickets with his first 2 balls, came in towards the end of the innings as well and cleaned it up. Great performance by him. Then the batting. Do we want to talk about the batting?
They just about bottled it, didn't they? They should have bottled it. That keeper, how's that keeper feeling, Pinksy? You probably got to back yourself to take that.
Yeah, look, absolutely. But again, I want to talk about the positives, I think, from that game and David Visa.
Probably seems stunned that you want to talk about positives.
Yeah.
He's just trying to shift the blame from a wicketkeeper. But
Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people with gloves in their bag in this tournament, aren't there? rather than genuine keepers. Ben Folkes at home at the moment. Visa. It just reminded me. I don't know whether you guys would have ever had this in New Zealand, but there used to be this concept in the UK of single wicket competitions, where you would get your club together and you would basically play as an individual. 11 other guys would field, and you'd have like literally one person versus one person, and it was almost like that. Visa, he's like taking the pads off and got the ball.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, fantastic performance from him with three for, and yes, they did nearly bottle that game, didn't they?
Well, I mean, they did. They needed 40 from 6 overs with 7 wickets in hand.
They needed 14 off 16 balls with 3 wickets down. They should have absolutely cruised it. They only needed 5 off the last over, and only ended up getting 4. I mean, credit to Miran.
Yeah,
brilliant effort to actually get them to that point. And like we said, that he did the job on that last ball. Wicketkeeper catches that, they've won that game, and he's the absolute hero of this tournament so far.
Yeah, and I guess that's the gamble, right? Stood up to the stumps rather than to back, because if you take the ball cleanly, it's game over. Unlucky.
Baldy, do you think it's a travesty they don't take the super over runs into account when they name Cricket Info's MVP?
Absolute travesty. I mean, there are lots of things that are travesties in society. I think this is probably
it's up there, isn't it? Are you going to be outside the Parliament campaigning this, protesting this?
No. I will
write a strongly worded letter
to my MP. Yes, if I know who they are, he or she is, I will write them a strongly worded letter to the sports minister as well.
He's losing his energy, boys. He's losing his energy.
Aside from the statistical issues there, I do have another hot take.
Oh, good.
I haven't enjoyed 50% of these matches that have been played. I've enjoyed
what
the American.
What percentage would you put on it, Raj?
Less than that.
Less than 50.
Yeah.
So you were about to say, but does that go back? Does that go back to the scores? Why?
In terms of the closest of the game, I enjoyed the Oman Namibia game. That's a game that I think is a one-off. 109 plays 109. That's good to watch. And they go to a super over. Canada USA sort of went up and down all the way through.
Yeah.
WinViz was going all over the place. But a lot of these other games were probably, I guess the Netherlands one was all right, but I felt like Netherlands had that in hand the whole time. But I feel like a lot of these were sort of over by parts of quite early in the piece, especially the one that stands out to me is that Afghanistan-Uganda game. You're always going to have those games, and I think the England-Scotland one, if it had been able to finish, would have been an absolute cracker. But I do feel like we are seeing, the fruits or the not so fruitful bits of having a 20-team tournament. You do have these games that can be a little bit less exciting, and especially when there aren't those headline names. If you're watching, Netherlands and Nepal, it was great because we know a lot of the people in the Netherlands team play in our club. But if that was people we didn't know, watching that game probably would have been a lot less exciting.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I also think that's not necessarily a function of the 20-team tournament. I mean, maybe it will be, and in terms of the Afghanistan-Uganda, obviously that came true, but I mean, we only have to look back to the 50-over World Cup when everyone was supposed to be, quite equal in terms of their abilities. But I think there were about 2 or 3 close games in that whole World Cup. There was, and I suppose we probably expect more from 2020 in terms of closeness, right? We expect that you're going to get that time where, I think the IPL probably treated us in that sense that teams were never out of it because there were so many games where there was 70 to get off 4 overs with, 5 down. Ordinarily, I mean, I think in this tournament, you'd look at that and go, oh, no chance, game's over. But then you'd have, Shashank Singh or someone like that just go absolutely ballistic and win them a game. And suddenly you believed that every single game in the IPL was able to do that. Whereas, maybe we don't sort of have that sense so far that this could happen.
Let's have a quick look forward before we wrap up the pod. I think India, interested to get takes from around the table. They're one of the last teams to play in this tournament. I think New Zealand obviously will follow.
New Zealand, Australia, Pakistan still haven't played, I don't think.
They haven't yet. So I think the question I want to ask is, would India want to be playing Ireland as their first game? It could be a crackerjack in terms of the support in New York for both India and Ireland, a big Irish population as well as Indian population in and around New York. Will Ireland be licking their lips that they've got a chance to catch India a little bit cold?
I don't know. I mean, you talked about that pitch before in New York, and I think that's going to be the big watch for me. What's it going to do in those first few overs? Because, I mean, it was moving all over the place in those first couple of overs in that Sri Lanka South Africa game. India
played a warm-up game there, though, and it was 180 runs scored. So, I don't know what deck it was on. But
I think, any 2020 game, the perceived underdog is going to be licking their lips to have a go, and maybe more so that India are probably a little more underdone. I'm on that sort of topic. I'm worried about New Zealand's first game. They feel every day that goes by and they haven't played, I'm like, wow, we really are sort of backing up our fixtures to the back end of the group stages. But Ireland definitely have a chance to catch India. 2020 cricket is 2020 cricket at the end of the day.
I'm quite interested to see what lineup India pick. And I think what they do throughout the tournament. I mean, touching on New Zealand, I know that Gary Stead has said this might be a tournament where New Zealand traditionally is a team that likes to pick the same 11 in a lot of different games. He said we might see a lot more unforced changes in this tournament based on pitches and based on conditions. And so, same with India. I'm interested to see kind of what combination of players they go with, because I think a lot of teams, again, are going to be in a situation where they might want to go with a longer batting lineup or more bowling options or the 2 spinners, 3 spinners, all of that kind of different stuff. And I think, India is a side that, again, chocked full of talent on the paper, but which combination of players do they think can actually do the job? And even someone like Sanju Samson, for example, is someone who, if he plays, where does he fit? Where does he go? He's someone who bats in the top order. Is he a finisher for India? Does he even get on the park and after a really, really good IPL? So a lot of permutations for them.
Dubé as well. I want him to not be there as a I feel like he's there as an add-on option, because he's a left-hander and there's not that many left-handers in this sort of in this batting lineup. But he can have a massive impact on any 2020 game. He can win it from everywhere, from anywhere. But I think he's going to struggle to make the side. He'll make the first side. Yeah. He'll probably play a few games, but I think he'll struggle to make the first side.
Yeah. You mentioned Gary Stead there in New Zealand. So, let's finish the podcast with a New Zealand theme. We've not been able to do that for the whole of the IPL, really. We've been just talking T20 franchise cricket and not covering our home nation, I guess.
Yep.
Players arriving in dribs and drabs into the Caribbean. How concerned, Raj, you just mentioned it, are you about that build-up, no warm-up games, etc.? Is that a concern, or you think it's hit the ground running? These guys are used to jumping in and out of big tournaments.
I think this particular set of players we do have that ability to move around the world, chop and change. It does worry me seeing those reports earlier in the day about people feeling a bit jet lagged because they got there a little bit later, and it makes me nervous that we're backing up our fixtures, and our first 2 fixtures are the important ones, the West Indies and Afghanistan. So it does make me nervous, but I still think I still believe.
I think that's probably the bigger worry for me. That is those 2 opening fixtures. We're not going to have time to build into this tournament. We have to be bang on the money. I actually think potentially that Afghanistan game is the trickiest game because of how we play our cricket. I think in the past, we have struggled to kind of rotate the strike against spin to actually figure out good plans. And that's, again, why I'm kind of highlighting that I think it's going to be so crucial. And Afghanistan have so many different spin options. I mean, they left Noor Ahmad out of their lineup in that game. Whether that, again, is something that they might do, that their lineup in particular is just filled with all-rounders. They've got, people like Gulbuddin batting, quite high up the order. Whereas he's a bowling option as well. Rashid Khan can kind of bat, all different places. So I think for me, it's more around, we are going to have to be on our game to start the tournament. In fairness, New Zealand started the tournament great against, I think back to Finalen going bananas against Australia a little while ago. Look back at the ODI World Cup, Rutchin and Devin Conway put on that show against England. So traditionally we have done reasonably well. I think people, turning up late, I don't think that's an issue now. I mean, we talked a little bit about the warm-ups last week. Australia played that warm-up game, right? But they were played with 9 players and Tim David was opening the bowling because Australia did the same. They let some of their IPL players go home and see their families for a few days before coming to this tournament. So, I don't think there's that much value in getting that kind of as a warm-up. That doesn't add anything for anyone. Yeah. But I think it's more around, a tournament like this where you can maybe only afford to lose one game in your pool, assuming that weather doesn't play a part. And those first two games are going to be the important ones to hit straight away.
Awesome. Well, Baldy's out of steam because he's
I've got one more fired up rant in me, so throw something at me and I'll go. But I'm happy to end the pod now.
3, 2, 1.
Australia are in real trouble against Oman. Oman have come out firing and said Australia can't play spin, that they've got guys that can hit sixes and can't do anything else. So, look, Australia are up against it, given that we've got a history of only playing 9 players apparently in the Caribbean, and one of them is 49-year-old George Bailey, who can't pick Jake Fraser-McGurk if Jake Fraser-McGurk was standing on his head. So Australia have got problems.
Right.
Is any of that true? None of that's true, is it?
Right.
Well, we'll see when Miran starts steaming into
to
David Warner, and we'll see what happens.
I think that's a really good place to end the podcast. So we're going to go and get an Alka-Seltzer and a Nurofen into Baldy. We've got three games coming up over the course of the next 24 hours. That India Ireland game. We talk about Australia, Oman. And then
Australia, England straight after that, aren't they?
Yeah, pretty hot on
the
weekend.
Heels. The weekend's good. Good fixtures at the weekend.
Yeah, but we will be back in your feeds throughout the course of this World Cup. We've not quite worked out the schedule yet, but we'll certainly be in your feeds every week or more throughout this World Cup. Please do drop some comments to us, particularly when we've got massive rules and laws and playing conditions wrong. It does help us prepare our content for the following podcast. But yeah, we might have a mulligan on the predictions. I'm still sticking strong for an Australia-West Indies final. Going to ride this wave as long as I possibly can, even though those seedings are ridiculous. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you soon on the next episode of the Top Order Podcast. See you later.